Good morning. Welcome to the July 2026 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. As is our tradition, if you'll please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. And Madam Secretary, with that, will you please introduce this morning's agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 5 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a report and order of proposed modification, and order on reconsideration that makes 160 megahertz of the upper C-band available in the contiguous United States via a system of competitive bidding. Second, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would overhaul the Commission's rules for licensing space and earth stations. Third, you will consider a report and order that would empower broadcast consumers through transparency. Fourth, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would improve the effectiveness of the Robocall mitigation database. Fifth, you will consider a third report and order and third further notice of proposed rulemaking aimed at further strengthening national security in the Equipment Authorization Program. Today's first item is titled Upper C-Band, Expanding Flexible Use of the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band, and will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Joel Taubenblatt, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a report and order, an order of proposed modification, and an order on reconsideration that would free up 160 megahertz of spectrum for terrestrial wireless flexible use throughout the contiguous United States in the 3.98 to 4.2 gigahertz band, otherwise known as the upper C-band, consistent with the congressional directive in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I would like to thank the WTB team for their hard work on this item, as well as OEA, OET, SB, OGC, and other bureaus and offices for their contributions. I would like to particularly thank Susan Mort, Deputy Bureau Chief of the Wireless Bureau, for her extraordinary dedication and commitment to bringing this proceeding to fruition. I would also like to recognize at the table with me John Castle, Andrew McCardell, and David Hu, attorney advisors in the Mobility Division of the Wireless Bureau. And John will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Recognizing that a robust spectrum pipeline is critical for maintaining U.S. leadership in connectivity-based technology and innovation, Congress passed and President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in 2025. Known as OB3, the act requires the Commission to complete a system of competitive bidding for at least 100 megahertz of the upper C-band by July 4th, 2027. Pursuant to Congress's direction and consistent with the Commission's longstanding objective to deliver for the American people on time, on budget, and with certainty to all stakeholders, the Commission released a notice of proposed rulemaking regarding the upper C-band in November 2025. Stakeholders filed over 100 comments and replies and met with Commission staff, demonstrating their proactive engagement in this proceeding. The Commission also extensively collaborated with its federal partners, notably the FAA and NTIA, in order to successfully navigate the complex in-band and adjacent band equities that cut across industry sectors. Today's order incorporates stakeholders' wide-ranging input. If adopted, the order would reallocate and make available for auction 160 megahertz of the upper C-band in the contiguous United States, significantly exceeding the OB3 Act's required minimum. It would also combine the lower C-band and a portion of the upper C-band into a single 3.7 gigahertz service, applying the existing 3.7 gigahertz service rules as a baseline, but amending or adding to them where necessary to create 440 megahertz of contiguous mid-band spectrum for flexible use, next-generation wireless terrestrial services. Critically, It would also promote a successful coexistence environment with adjacent band radio altimeters through the adoption of specific technical measures and a carefully coordinated timeline for the introduction of terrestrial wireless operations starting in December 2030 that aligns with the FAA's forthcoming radio altimeter retrofit requirements. The order would establish a transition process to fairly and expeditiously relocate fixed satellite service incumbents out of the reconfigured portion of the upper C-band, consistent with the Commission's long-standing emerging technologies precedent. The order also provides rebates to defined classes of eligible aircraft owners and operators to facilitate compliance with the FAA's expected radio altimeter retrofit requirements. Finally, the order would resolve various pending petitions for reconsideration filed in response to the Commission's 2020 order reconfiguring the lower C-band. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I think this one is a really, really good win for the country, but I will reserve most of my praise for it until my turn. But for now, we'll hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The latest FCC Marketplace report estimated that there were between 492 and 558 million mobile wireless connections in our country by the end of 2023. So that estimate is now 3 years old. Long before the men's FIFA World Cup inspired Freddie from Germany to travel across our country, discovering the joys of American culture and sharing his discoveries through social media. We can only anticipate that since then, thousands of new wireless connections have been established, allowing us to enjoy every match from our phone and to meet Freddie. These lighthearted moments of cultural joy shared online are made possible by Spectrum licenses. There are limited times when Spectrum licenses for mobile services become available. This is one of those times. With today's order, we implement a congressional directive to auction as much upper C-band spectrum as possible, thus enabling more wireless connectivity that benefits consumers and connects us to each other. While I believe the Commission should have conducted both a tribal licensing window and an upper C-band auction within the deadline Congress indicated, I understand the Commission's interpretation of Congress's directive was to move the auction expeditiously. For these reasons, I approve in part and dissent in part. Notwithstanding my partial dissent, I would like to thank the chairman and his staff for working with me on edits to this order that acknowledge the requests of tribal nations and other underserved stakeholders to access much-needed spectrum. It is important we acknowledge these requests. As part of the federal government, the FCC has a trust responsibility to tribal nations. The United States trust responsibility to tribes is a legal obligation established by the Constitution, treaties, and over 100 years of Supreme Court precedent. Under this obligation, we engage with tribal nations on a government-to-government basis and are charged with carrying out the law in a manner that supports their sovereignty. The unique legal framework and relationship between the federal government and tribal nations requires us to ensure that they have a fair and meaningful opportunity to secure spectrum that is essential to their economic development, public safety, and cultural preservation. In the record leading up to the Upper C-band auction, the Navajo Nation, the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, the Tohono O'odham Utility Authority, the IT director of the Bishop Paiute tribe, the National Congress of American Indians, representing hundreds of tribal governments, the Coalition of Large Tribes, an intertribal organization representing more than 50 tribes with large reservations, a tribal broadband provider, a nonprofit that trains tribes to build and operate internet networks, and numerous public interest groups asked us to hold a tribal licensing window. Holding a tribal licensing window is consistent with and acknowledges our trust responsibility. While we will not hold a window in this auction, I'm grateful to Chairman Carr for agreeing to seek comment about the window in the record of this proceeding. Notwithstanding the decision on a tribal licensing window, I want to commend the chair, his team, and the Bureau for achieving the formidable task of delivering this order. Getting to an upper C-band auction was not an easy feat. The FCC had to traverse a long road of complex negotiations with many stakeholders, each with their own needs, asks, and concerns. But the FCC did not shy away. The agency did admirable work to establish a process to clear a band with long-standing incumbents and an ecosystem of clients that depend on those incumbents. That, alongside coordinating with federal agencies to ensure that the technology necessary to facilitate clearing the band is underway to become available to the ecosystem of clients that depend on that technology and encourage them to adopt it. In this complex environment, the FCC sought consensus to clear the way for a smooth band transition. I will be paying attention to how the auction and subsequent band transition unfold to ensure our decisions today result in a competitive marketplace that benefits and connects consumers. Undoubtedly, spectrum management is hard work. The chair, his staff, and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau should be proud of getting us to today.
Thank you. Hear from Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. Today's report and order marks a significant milestone in advancing the United States' continued leadership in wireless innovation and next-generation communications. Thanks to President Trump and Congress, who restored the FCC's General Spectrum Auction Authority in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we are another step closer to making more spectrum available for full-power license use. This will drive increased investment in 5G today and lay the foundation for the 6G ecosystem of tomorrow. In addition to building on the successful framework established in the lower C-band, this item positions the FCC to conduct the auction of upper C-band spectrum on an aggressive timeline, while also establishing a clear and predictable process for transitioning incumbent satellite operators out of the band. On top of that, this item ensures that support will be available for reasonable and necessary relocation costs and will preserve the continuity of essential broadcast and communication services. Importantly, this report and order will protect aviation safety amid our ongoing work to intensify spectrum use, work that's critical to our long-term economic competitiveness and national resilience. Looking ahead, today's action has the potential to advance international progress on spectrum policy as well, by demonstrating how more resilient radar altimeters can support greater coexistence among the aviation community, federal users, and commercial wireless operations in other bands, including the 4 gigahertz band. Indeed, all of these anticipated outcomes of the upper C-band spectrum auction are significant, but the greatest beneficiaries here will be American consumers. Expanding access to valuable mid-band spectrum will enable providers to deploy faster, more reliable, and affordable wireless services, and expand capacity to deliver the benefits of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence to communities across this country. Although there's still important work ahead to ensure a successful auction and an orderly transition for incumbent operators, today's actions put us firmly on the right path. It demonstrates this Commission's continued commitment to advancing spectrum policies that meet the demands of the future and strengthen America's position as the world's leader in wireless innovation. Finally, this item reflects an extraordinary collaborative effort, and so I commend Chairman Carr as well as FCC staff for their thoughtful and diligent work in navigating the many complex technical, legal, and operational issues involved, as well as the many stakeholders who contributed their expertise throughout this proceeding. So thank you again to the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for their outstanding work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Like I said, this particular item is a really big deal. America's leadership in wireless is back. After years of falling behind and no new spectrum auctions, President Trump and Congress restored the FCC Spectrum Auction Authority in the One Big Beautiful Bill and established an aggressive spectrum pipeline. In doing so, the statute assigned to the FCC an unprecedented task: auction a massive swath of mid-band spectrum and do it in record time. Thanks to the early and close collaboration with the FCC's federal partners across the administration, including the FAA, we are delivering on time, on budget, and with no surprises. Today's decision to auction 160 megahertz of the upper C-band is a really good outcome for consumers. Our decision sets the stage for the FCC to run an auction of this prime mid-band spectrum next year, exceeding the 100 megahertz minimum established in the law. The lower C-band, which the FCC freed up during the previous Trump administration, brought 5G, fixed wireless, which I'm told cable likes a lot, and other innovations to countless Americans. now in auction in the upper C-band, which sits right next door, will unify the two bands to create an enormous swath of 440 megahertz. This harmonized super band will be the envy of the world. Freeing up this spectrum drives down prices for consumers, raises speeds, and enhances competition. And thanks to President Trump's leadership, America will once again lead the world in wireless. The legislation made certain that we'll put this prime mid-band spectrum to its best use through a significant FCC auction. To get where we are has been a feat in and of itself. The upper C-band is a Rubik's Cube of wireless, aviation, satellite, media stakeholders, throwing a little bit of money on top of it, and it gets to be pretty complicated pretty quick. Solving the puzzle is hard enough, but doing it in record time brings the accomplishment to another level. The FCC's staff, we all adopted an NPRM just 4 months after passage of the legislation. It took 7 months after that for us to get to the decision that we reached today. And we're now on track to complete an auction in less than 12 months from now. We've also accelerated the post-auction transition schedule so that wireless providers can light up the upper C-band and provide service to most Americans by the end of 2030, ahead of many expectations. We could not have done it without our many agency partners across the administration that worked towards this important accomplishment. And I greatly appreciate, in particular, the extensive coordination and collaboration we enjoyed with our FAA colleagues. I think some of the FAA folks are here today. If you are here, raise your hand. There you are. Okay, don't be shy about it. So from the FAA, I believe we have here Brett Day, Lindsay Scott, and Crystal SEO. So thank you all for your hard work behind the scenes on this. Again, we couldn't have gotten there without your work as well. The steps the FAA will be undertaking in parallel with this FCC decision will ensure that C-band services successfully coexist with critical aviation safety tools in the adjacent band. Indeed, the FCC and FAA processes will together provide for the upgrade of radio altimeters and provide rebates to support eligible domestic aircraft operators and owners in that effort. Of course, we're not done. Over the next year, we must continue to focus on efficiency and execution to ensure the auction runs smoothly, alongside the aviation and satellite transition processes that will get underway soon. Meanwhile, we expect more auctions by the end of 2028 and working hard on that front. And I want to thank in particular the FCC's talented staff that worked tirelessly on this proceeding. As I noted, the agency acted with unprecedented speed, solving complex problems and doing so while collaborating closely with government and private sector stakeholders. We literally would not be here voting today but for the hard work of the entire agency team that worked on this. So many special thanks, that whole group, Susan Moore, Joel Talbot-Platt, Andrew McCardle, Janet Young, John Castle, Cameron Duncan, David Hugh, all in the Wireless Bureau. And I thanked her in particular earlier at an event this morning, but I also want to give a shout out here to Susan Moore, who really sort of motored this entire effort. I remember bringing her up, I don't know, every week, every other week, asking her how we were doing. Are we on time? Are we on budget? Are there any surprises? And every time she left me with a lot of confidence that she had this, she was working on it, she was going to get this in a good spot, and she did everything that she said she would do. And we're just eternally grateful, Susan, for your work and leadership, but also to the entire crew here that worked tirelessly on this effort. So you have my thanks and appreciation. With that, we'll turn to a vote, and we'll start with my colleague, Commissioner Gomez.
Approve in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. So the item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. So thanks again to the team. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is titled Space Modernization for the 21st Century and will be presented by the Space Bureau. Jay Schwartz, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Chief, when you and your team are ready, please proceed.
All right, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Have several members of the Space Bureau with me. We have Carolyn Mahoney, Sankar Prasad, Greg Koutros, Janine Poltroneri, and to present the item today is Brandon Padgett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. The Space Bureau presents to you a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would overhaul and modernize the Commission's space and Earth station licensing process to ensure that new space-based industries, space exploration capabilities, and cutting-edge defense systems are pioneered in America. The item would create a licensing assembly line to expeditiously route space and Earth station applications. This new process would provide greater predictability and flexibility for applicants, and, like actual assembly lines, accelerate space and Earth station review processes while improving the quality of the Commission's space licensing work. This report and order would replace Part 25 of the Commission's rules with Part 100. In doing so, it would delete unnecessary and outdated rules and organize the new rules in a manner that's easier to understand. Additionally, it would create an application processing framework based on bright line criteria presumed to be in the public interest, modify processing round procedures, and remove the bond requirement for certain space stations. It would also create a new variable trajectory space station license category, extend license terms for most space and Earth stations to 20 years, allow for a nationwide blanket licensing approach for Earth stations, and require space station operators to share space situational awareness data. In addition, the item includes a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would seek comment on additional proposals and reforms intended to build upon the new Part 100. The Bureau recommends adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Overhauling an entire section of the Commission's rules is a daunting undertaking, but the Space Bureau said, "Hold my coffee." With this very ambitious item, we aim to modernize and improve our space station and Earth station licensing processes to keep up with the fast pace of innovation and deployment in space. To do this, FCC staff took a painstaking and careful review of the Part 25 rules, listened to stakeholders, and remodeled them into Part 100. Since this is a significant change for the agency, I look forward to hearing feedback from stakeholders as we implement these rules. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Space Bureau staff, not just for the long hours that you worked to get to today, but for the dedicated work you have done at our agency for decades. Thank you for helping us ensure we keep pace with innovation. And thank you also to the Office of the Chair for working with my office on edits for this important item. So great work all around for this ambitious item.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. Space has been described as the new frontier of communications, but today it's so much more than that. Space-based technologies have fast become a cornerstone of America's economic prosperity, national security, and technological leadership. In communications, advanced satellite constellations are rapidly transforming the marketplace. By expanding access to broadband and enabling direct-to-device voice and data services, while delivering innovative applications and connectivity solutions that were unimaginable just a few years ago. I've seen this transformation firsthand during recent visits to Amazon Leo and SpaceX manufacturing facilities, where American workers are building and launching the next generation of low Earth orbit satellites. These investments are expanding connectivity, lowering costs for consumers, and strengthening America's technological edge. This administration has made clear that it intends to usher in a new era of commercial space leadership by removing unnecessary barriers to innovation. At the FCC, modernizing our satellite licensing framework is a critical part of that effort. For too long, legacy rules adopted under the Commission's Part 25 regulatory framework has operated as a patchwork of requirements that no longer reflects the pace or complexity of today's satellite industry or the space economy writ large. Our regulatory framework should do more than simply keep up with technological change. It should encourage it. It should create room for the kind of breakthroughs that have reshaped the space domain over the past decade and maintain flexibility to accommodate innovations we cannot predict. This item does exactly that. By replacing the legacy Part 25 framework with the new Part 100, we establish a modern, streamlined licensing system that allows American innovators to focus on innovating and building technologies that will define the future, instead of wasting time and money wading through unnecessary red tape. The stakes for this approach extend beyond our borders as well. Around the world, Nations recognize that leadership in space will guide the next generation of communications, commerce, warfighting, security, and more. Foreign competitors are investing aggressively and in some cases adopting protectionist policies designed to advantage domestic operators and slow or halt our progress. The rules we adopt today position the United States to counter those policies and lead by example. By creating the world's most modern satellite licensing framework, we reinforce America's leadership in the global space economy and help ensure that the next generation of space innovation is developed, launched, and led by the United States. Finally, I thank the Space Bureau for their outstanding work on this item. Their thoughtful engagement with stakeholders and dedication throughout this proceeding have produced a framework that will serve the Commission and the American public for years to come. Many thanks to you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioners. Less than a year ago, I had the chance to get back to El Segundo. It's a gritty neighborhood filled with old warehouses that bumps up against LAX. It's also become ground zero for America's reindustrialization. That's where America's innovators, particularly in space, are building new satellite production facilities. They're experimenting with ways you can create medicines in the zero-gravity environment of outer space, and they're working on launch solutions. Spending time there, walking the new factory floors, watching this American reindustrialize take place, and witnessing the explosion of hard tech, it all served as a powerful reminder that we're entering this new golden age of space innovation in America. It's why boosting America's space economy is a central pillar of the Build America agenda. And to build the orbital infrastructure of tomorrow, the FCC must do its part to ensure that the U.S. is the best place in the world to launch, to operate, and to license satellite operations. Today's space industry needs a regulatory framework that has speed and simplicity, one that allows companies to operate at the scale of hundreds of thousands of satellites, data centers, transport vehicles, and rockets. With today's decision, we make good on that promise. We're voting today to replace the cumbersome rules of the past with a new Part 100 that creates a licensing assembly line. Our modernization journey has unfolded in two phases. Right out of the gate, the Space Bureau relentlessly focused on operating with speed and efficiency. Over the last 18 months, we've approved a laundry list of deals that will inject new investment in energy into the space economy, especially in the direct-to-cell, direct-to-device market. At the same time, we granted licenses for industry-shaping constellations that will prove pivotal to American space superiority. We also moved much faster to reduce our processing times, cutting the backlog of FCC approvals by half. But that's not enough. To get where we need to be requires a fundamental overhaul of our processes, not just better execution. Our legacy Part 25 rules were not suited for the long term. So today we're doing something unprecedented. We're scrapping our old rules in their entirety and replacing them with better new ones. This kind of ambition shouldn't be taken for granted. Regulators tend to tinker around the edges. They don't throw away the rule book and rewrite it from scratch. They take years and decades to reform, not 18 months. The Space Bureau landed the rare trifecta on that, all while pushing through other game-changing reforms on spectrum sharing and spectrum abundance. There's so much to like in the new Part 100 rules. For one, speed and predictability is built into the DNA. The new rules establish bright lines and eliminate fuzzy standards. They keep licensing focused on the FCC's core statutory responsibilities, spectrum management, harmful interference, national security, and orbital debris. They eliminate guessing games and hidden requirements. While most applications will breeze through a fast lane, the new rules outline the limited situations when more targeted review is needed. And if an application falls within the four corners of our new Part 100, it's presumed to serve the public interest. That's just not making promises. The rules say this with clarity. The quality and predictability of our decisions will improve dramatically as a result. We're also allowing more flexibility to move past historical assumptions that have shackled unforeseen innovation For example, Part 100 will allow for multiple satellites to co-locate at a single orbital slot. It also streamlines licensing for emerging industries like transfer vehicles and commercial lunar craft. And that's just the beginning. This 300-page decision is full of vibrant, innovative ideas that draw from the Space Bureau's years of experience and the best feedback that the public and stakeholders had to offer. Now, when we launched our build agenda, I said that we would think about things from a first principles perspective. And here we're pursuing the best way to get something done, not just blindly following what's been done before. If the right answer requires us to change the way we do business, that's what we'll do. With the creation of Part 100 and the licensing assembly line, we're staying true to that mindset and making sure the U.S. remains the greatest place in the world to build and operate a space business. For their work on this really significant item, I want to thank the whole team that worked on it, in particular, obviously, the Space Bureau, Greg Coutreau, Clay DeSalle, Gabriel Gerston, Carolyn Mahoney, Stephanie Neville, Brandon Paget, Sankar Prasad, Janine Poltaniro, Chief Jay Schwartz, and Delaney Wood as well. Thanks to the team for all of the great work on this. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. And Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda is titled Improving Broadband Labels and will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Edward Bartolome, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Ed, when you and the team are ready, please.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Today, I'm pleased to introduce, on behalf of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, an item that, if adopted, would refocus the Commission's broadband label rules on ensuring that consumers have clear, accurate, and concise information about broadband plans, making the labels a more useful shopping tool. Before turning the presentation over to my CGB colleague, I would like to thank the Enforcement, Wireline, Wireless, Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureaus, and the Offices of Communications Business Opportunities, Economics and Analytics, and our General Counsel for their valuable assistance. Joining me at the table today are Michelle Brannigan, an attorney advisor in CGB's Consumer Policy Division, and Wes Platt, Chief of the Consumer Policy Division. Michelle will present the item.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. The report and order before you today would refocus the broadband label rules on what Congress required in the Infrastructure Act: clear, accurate, and concise disclosure of broadband plan information to consumers. Specifically, the order would allow phone sale representatives to present label information conversationally as a summary of key label fields, rather than requiring verbatim recitation of a visual document in an oral format for which it was not designed. It would simplify label display of variable pass-through fees, allowing providers to convey them as an up-to maximum while preserving the option to itemize. It would remove from the label the reference to the Affordable Connectivity Program, which ended in June of 2024. It would clarify that a prominently displayed hyperlink or icon in a customer portal directing consumers to their current plan label satisfies the requirement that labels be easily accessible in customer portals, allow providers to use hyperlinks or icons at the point of sale instead of displaying the full label to help consumers better view labels on their mobile phones, eliminate the requirement to provide label content separately in a machine-readable spreadsheet file while retaining the obligation to ensure label information is accessible to people with disabilities, eliminate the 2-year label archiving requirement for discontinued plans, direct the Consumer Protection and Accessibility Advisory Committee to assess the effectiveness of broadband labels, and move the label template from the Code of Federal Regulations to an FCC website, and delegate further template changes to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. The order also would close pending inquiries from the first further notice of proposed rulemaking and remove now moot implementation deadlines from the rules. These changes will ensure the labels continue to help consumers make informed decisions by providing information that is relevant, easy to read and understand, and quick to access, while reducing unnecessary compliance burdens. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The Commission's decision should always be centered around a clear analysis of how our actions impact consumers. I'm pleased that many of the consumer concerns I raised when the Commission considered the NPRM last year have been addressed in today's report and order. This item ensures phone calls remain categorized as a point of sale. The reality is that some consumers shopping for a broadband service do not currently have it, so they rely on phone calls to find information about potential service plans. The rules we adopt today require that critical information is conveyed over the phone, including the monthly price, inclusive of any monthly fees, the introductory rate and its duration, typical download and upload speeds, latency, data allowance, contract term, and early termination fees. Regarding fee itemization, I thank the Chairman's office and the Bureau for working with me to find a careful balance between providing consumers with valuable information and keeping the labels functional and easy to use. In addition to a single aggregate or maximum amount for pass-through fees that will allow consumers to comparison shop, the labels will provide a breakdown by fees that are remitted to state and local governments and those remitted to third parties. Each category will also include a list of the types of fees passed on to consumers. Though I would have preferred that the labels provide a complete itemization, consumers will have the option to click on a link below to learn more about each of the types of fees and what they are used for. Today's item also retains the requirement that providers include broadband labels in customers' account portables. However, we narrow that requirement to providing a hyperlink or icon rather than requiring the full label to be displayed. While my preference would have been to display the full label, my hope is that the Commission, our industry partners, and consumer groups will work together to promote and advertise the concept of broadband labels such that consumers seek out this resource and use it regularly. In the same way that grocery store shoppers want to know how much protein or fiber is in the food they are buying, I hope that consumers shopping for broadband will seek out broadband labels when making their purchasing decisions. This report and order also retains the requirement that industry provide consumers with the broadband label, excuse me, in whichever language the service was marketed to them. This is a win for consumers. I've long advocated for consumer-facing information to be provided in multiple languages. Every consumer, regardless of their language of choice, deserves to be well informed when making purchasing decisions, and we protect that right today. Through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a bipartisan Congress instructed the Commission to establish a requirement for broadband service providers to display easy-to-understand labels. In doing so, it indicated its intent to ensure that information regarding broadband internet access service plans is available, effective, and sufficient for consumers, thus ensuring that consumers are well informed about the price of their broadband internet service is an ongoing obligation. As technology, service offerings, billing practices, and consumer needs change over time, the Commission should revisit our disclosure requirements to confirm that they continue to serve consumers well. I thank the Chairman's Office for implementing my request that the Consumer Protection and Accessibility Advisory Committee be tasked with producing an assessment of consumer benefit on a recurring basis. The committee, comprised of both industry representatives and consumer advocates, will produce reports that identify the extent to which broadband labels reach consumers, any challenges that remain in ensuring consumers are aware the labels exist and understand how to use them, and recommendations for how the Commission, the industry, and consumer groups can work together to better market the labels for consumers. These reports will also evaluate the extent to which broadband labels are accessible for consumers with disabilities, identify any challenges that remain, and provide recommendations for how the FCC and providers can work together to address accessibility challenges. I look forward to reviewing these recommendations and contributing to future Commission efforts to provide the labels and to better inform consumers. Thank you to the Chairman for working with me on edits, and thank you to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for your work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. Through the Build America agenda, the Commission is advancing efforts to achieve universal connectivity. But expanding access is only part of the equation. Consumers also need clear, accurate information to make informed decisions about the broadband services they purchase. The Commission has long recognized this principle. For nearly 15 years, our broadband transparency rule has required providers to publicly disclose accurate information about the commercial terms and technical characteristics of their services, sufficient for consumers to make informed decisions. That rule remains in place and continues to ensure that consumers, the Commission, and the broader Internet ecosystem have access to the information they need. In the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Congress directed the Commission to require broadband providers to display consumer labels modeled on the approach described in the Commission's 2016 public notice. The balanced reforms adopted today will continue to provide consumers with meaningful information while ensuring our rules avoid imposing unnecessary burdens on providers. Imagine for a moment a family moving into a new home and comparing broadband options. They're looking for straightforward answers. How much will this service cost each month? What speeds can I expect? Are there additional fees? A broadband label should help them answer those questions quickly and confidently, not require them to navigate unnecessary complexity or decipher confusing disclosures. The record demonstrates that requiring providers to itemize every pass-through fee could create confusion rather than promote transparency. Consumers overwhelmingly want confidence that they will not be surprised by a higher price than they anticipated. Displaying aggregate amounts of applicable pass-through fees accomplishes that objective while reducing complexity. Broadband labels must also be displayed in ways that reflect how consumers shop today. Allowing providers to use links or icons to access broadband labels recognizes the realities of modern digital commerce, particularly on mobile devices. I also appreciate the item's clarification that any links or icons used for this purpose must be clearly identified so consumers can easily locate the broadband label. Finally, I want to acknowledge the importance of accessibility. I appreciate that this item will enlist the help of the Consumer Protection and Accessibility Advisory Committee to examine those accessibility issues as part of its broader reviews of the usefulness of broadband labels in the future. That approach will allow the Commission to benefit from stakeholder expertise and advice regarding how to account for technological advancements. My many thanks to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for their great work on this important item.
Thank you, Commissioners. Today, the FCC is taking another step to make sure that broadband nutrition labels work for consumers. When Congress directed the FCC to create these broadband labels, the goal was simple: give Americans clear, useful information for comparison shopping. But over the last few years, we've learned that when labels become cluttered with unnecessary details and information, they stop being the quick, easy-to-use shopping tool that Congress envisioned. That's why we're streamlining them today. The new label removes unnecessary clutter, eliminates outdated information like references to the expired Affordable Connectivity Program, and gives providers more practical ways to make labels available. None of these changes come at the expense of transparency. Providers will still offer a label for every standalone broadband plan. Consumers will get necessary information about pricing, introductory rates, speeds, and data allowances. And the labels will remain accessible and available in the languages providers use to market their services. The result is a label that's easier for consumers to use while reducing compliance costs for providers. It's a win all the way around. I want to thank the team for all the great work on this. Thanks to Chief Bartholomew, Mark Stone, Wes Platt, Zach Champ, Michelle Brannigan, Robert Aldrich, David Consul, Richard Mallon, Jonathan Lecter, and Kim Makich as well for all of their help. With that, we will proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. And Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 on your agenda is titled Improving the Effectiveness of the Robocall Mitigation Database and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Joseph Calichon, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Chief, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration this morning a further notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would strengthen the reliability of the Robocall mitigation database. I'd like to thank the entire team for their hard work on this item, as well as our colleagues throughout the Commission. With me at the table are Jody May, Chief of the Bureau's Competition Policy Division, Chris Laughlin, Deputy Chief of the Division, and Mary Wolf, Attorney Advisor, who will now present the item.
Thank you, Joseph. And good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This further notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, would advance measures to strengthen the reliability, integrity, and effectiveness of the Robocall mitigation database as a central tool for preventing and stopping illegal calls. The item proposes and seeks comment on ways to ensure that providers' RMD filings are accurate, complete, and up to date, and that only legitimate, transparent, and accountable providers can enter or remain in the database. Specifically, the further notice would propose measures to strengthen RMD filing obligations by confirming which entities must file and improving the accuracy and completeness of required information, and would seek comment on new requirements for updating filings. The further notice would also introduce new tools designed to prevent bad actors and non-compliant providers from entering or remaining in the RMD. These measures include enhanced screening efforts for new filers, improved tools for identifying non-compliant entities, expedited removal processes, and new mechanisms to prevent unauthorized reentry. These proposals will reinforce the RMD as a cornerstone of the Commission's illegal call prevention framework, strengthen enforcement efforts, complement other safeguards across the Commission and industry, and help rebuild trust in voice communications. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thanks. Want to hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
This item takes a hard look at the robocall mitigation databases and proposes important improvements. Consumers rely on this database to work as advertised, and today's proposals ask the right questions about how to make sure it does. Stopping illegal robocalls has always been one of the issues where this commission works well across party lines, and I'm glad to see that spirit continue here. I want to thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for their work on this item, and I am pleased to support it.
Commissioner?
Thanks. 35 years ago this month, Congress introduced the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which was later signed into law by President George H.W. Bush. That landmark legislation established important protections against unwanted and illegal calls. But the communications landscape has changed dramatically over the past 3.5 decades. As technology has evolved, so too have the tactics of scammers and other bad actors. At the Commission, we have a responsibility to modernize our tools to protect consumers from these exploits and preserve trust in our communications networks and the surrounding ecosystem. Today's further notice of proposed rulemaking builds on the Commission's ongoing efforts to combat illegal robocalls by seeking comment on ways to strengthen the robocall mitigation database and improve our ability to identify, investigate, and remove non-compliant providers. Effectively combating illegal robocalls and scam calls requires the Commission to have accurate information about providers as well as reliable, modern tools to analyze that information and take appropriate remedial action when warranted to remove providers from the call path. I look forward to considering the record developed in this proceeding along with other open rulemakings to identify the best set of solutions to strengthen the integrity of our communications networks while avoiding unnecessary burdens on legitimate voice service providers and consumers. Thank you to the Wireline Competition Bureau for your great work on this important item.
Thanks, Commissioners. Earlier this week, I had the chance to join Secretary Bessent and FTC Chairman Ferguson for a roundtable over at Treasury of the meeting of the Payment, Fraud, and Scams Working Group. The working group brought together leaders from social media companies, telecom companies, and others to discuss ways the federal government can continue to detect and prevent payment fraud and other scams. An important part of that conversation is how we can continue to fight and crack down on illegal robocalls. Fighting illegal robocalls remains the FCC's top consumer protection priority. Since I became chair, we've been taking a new approach to combating such calls by tackling the problem at every point in the call path. That means holding every provider involved in carrying a call accountable from origination to termination. Ultimately, every provider touching a call must know who it is doing business with and be held accountable for the traffic it's carrying and ultimately delivering to Americans. We've kicked off proceedings that would do so in a number of different ways, including through strengthening the FCC's Know Your Customer requirements, strengthening the Know Your Upstream provider obligations, tightening access to numbering resources, financially deterring illegal robocalls that originate overseas, and improving call authentication standards. We've also continued to pursue an aggressive enforcement approach by going after bad actors, including against providers that have violated the rules governing the Robocall Mitigation Database, or the RMD. Last summer, we removed nearly 1,400 providers because of deficiencies in their filing, cutting off their ability to pass bad traffic along U.S. networks. Today's item builds on that work by strengthening the RMD in several ways. We're seeking comment on raising the bar for what types of information providers need to submit into the database, including details about their mitigation practices and other relevant enforcement activity. We're also seeking comment on how we can remove bad actors from the database in a more streamlined way. Through these changes, the agency will make it harder for bad actors to hide behind layers of intermediaries and in turn make it easier to identify and stop unlawful traffic before it reaches your phone. Thanks again to the staff for all their great work on this important item, including Chief Calichone, Kara Voth, Jody May, Chris Laughlin, Mary Wolf, John Menges, Daniel Stepanovich, John Adams, Derek Yo, and Warren Yang. Thanks all for your work on this. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 5 on your agenda is titled Strengthening Rules Governing Dangerous Gear and will be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Andrew Hendrickson, Chief of the Office, will give the introduction.
Chief, when you're ready.
Ready. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm pleased to introduce a third report and order and a third further notice of proposed rulemaking that will strengthen the Commission's equipment authorization program by addressing national security risks, closing a loophole that permits authorization of devices containing prohibited components, and tightening the marketing and recertification requirements. Joining me at the table is Alice Chu, Chief of Staff, Mateo Dunn, Senior Attorney Advisor. Mateo will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The third report and order and third further notice of proposed rulemaking in the Protecting Against National Security Threats to the Communications Supply Chain through the Equipment Authorization Program proceeding, presented for your consideration today, would continue the Commission's work to strengthen the Equipment Authorization Program against national security risks to the communications supply chain, building on the first and second report and orders and the Commission's recent covered list additions addressing uncrewed aircraft systems, UAS critical components, and routers produced overseas. If approved, the third report and order would prohibit the authorization of logic-bearing hardware components produced by entities identified on the covered list to include all devices that incorporate such components. Second, the R&O would clarify that our marketing rules reach online marketplaces that list, distribute, or offer unauthorized equipment, and would require those marketplaces to display the FCC ID of certified devices at the online point of sale. OET received a substantial number of ex parte comments with respect to this requirement, so OET has modified the scope to exclude small sellers, used equipment, and existing product listings, among other changes. Third, the R&O would require full certification for any modification or permissive change made by an entity identified on the covered list, and would bar such entities from using the supplier's declaration of conformity process for any modification, whether for covered or non-covered equipment. Fourth, the RNO would adopt a narrow definition of critical infrastructure. The USA Patriot Act, Section 1016E definition, guided by the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and 55 national critical functions, removing the connected to language the court found overbroad. The accompanying third further notice of proposed rulemaking would seek comment on bifurcating the covered list into producer, provider-based, and production location-based categories, enhancing supply chain transparency through hardware and software bills of materials, broadening component prohibitions to reach any hardware, software, or firmware produced by a covered list entity, and requiring certification for all devices in covered list sectors. The notice would also seek comments strengthening enforcement through streamlined revocation, term limits on equipment authorizations, registration of SDOC devices, and a U.S.-based liable party requirement. The Office of Engineering and Technology recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The steps we take today are critical for strengthening our national security and safeguarding the integrity of our communication supply chain. At the same time, I recognize the realities faced by businesses as they implement these new requirements. We must ensure that our actions protect the public without placing unreasonable burdens on industry that result in restricting the availability of essential equipment for consumers. I'm pleased that, through careful consideration of stakeholder input, we have adopted a balanced approach that addresses security vulnerabilities while minimizing unnecessary disruption. I want to thank the chairman and his team for their collaborative efforts on the item, and the Office of Engineering and Technology for your good work and dedication. Your commitment to both national security and the interests of American consumers and businesses has been essential.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. Last month, my team and I visited the Office of Engineering and Technology's Laboratory Division in Columbia, Maryland. There, the Commission's expert engineers evaluate radio frequency devices and related technologies to assess interference risks and verify compliance with our technical rules. The work performed at the lab is rigorous, highly technical, and essential to the inner workings of the communications ecosystem. It also helps ensure that the devices Americans rely upon every day are safe, reliable, and worthy of the public's trust. That mission requires constant vigilance and close collaboration among government, industry, and independent testing bodies, and today's item reflects that important responsibility. Manufacturers that bring products such as drones, networking equipment, and security devices to the U.S. market rely on complex global supply chains to source hundreds of components that go into a single device. While these supply chains have fueled innovation and lowered cost, they can also create opportunities for hardware manufactured by foreign adversaries to enter products sold in the United States. In some cases, a single compromised component can introduce vulnerabilities that undermine the security of an otherwise compliant device. Today's report and order closes that security gap by ensuring that these components produced by entities on the covered list cannot be incorporated into devices authorized for sale in the United States through our equipment authorization process. By closing these loopholes, we strengthen the integrity of our supply chains, better protect our communications networks, and enhance our national security. I appreciate that this item also improves transparency throughout the equipment authorization process and clarifies our rules to make them more predictable for manufacturers, testing laboratories, and certification bodies. Finally, I welcome the further notice of proposed rulemaking, which seeks comment on additional ways to improve supply chain transparency, strengthen enforcement of the equipment authorization program, and ensure that our rules maintain flexibility to address both emerging technologies and evolving national security risks. As communications technologies advance, our policies must keep pace to ensure continued trustworthiness and the resilience of our networks. I thank the staff of the Office of Engineering and Technology for their great work on this item.
Thanks, Commissioners. The FCC's covered list has evolved a lot over the years. Congress created it originally in 2019 in the Secure Networks Act, and it did so to bar FCC subsidies to carriers using dangerous equipment. Congress provided the list with additional teeth in 2021 through the Secure Equipment Act, which prohibited the FCC from authorizing covered equipment for import or sale. In 2022, we adopted rules implementing those prohibitions. Over the last year and a half, the FCC has continued to lean on the covered list. Indeed, the FCC has added new products, new services, and new entities to it. This includes the addition of foreign-produced drones and routers that national security agencies have determined pose an unacceptable risk. As a result, new models of drones and routers are generally prohibited. And since these national security actions, we've seen many economic benefits as well. Over $4 billion have flowed into U.S.-based drone and related production companies, opening up hundreds of thousands of square feet of new manufacturing space and creating thousands of jobs. We're seeing similar results on the router side as well, with dozens of companies committed to produce routers in America, up from approximately 0 a couple years ago. Additionally, following the FCC's covered list rulemakings, since the agency adopted our initial rules, we've taken steps to prohibit the import or sale of even already authorized covered equipment. Last month, for instance, we finalized a ban on already authorized devices that the agency added to the covered list in 2024 or earlier. And just yesterday, we proposed to ban the import or sale of already authorized foreign-produced military-grade drones, including those that are capable of swarming activity. Given all of this action today, we're taking a range of additional steps to bolster and modernize the agency's covered list rules. Among other final and proposed rules, a couple are worth highlighting in particular. First, we take action to finally and fully close the component part loophole. Since 2022, devices made by covered list entities like Huawei were banned from getting new authorizations, but devices containing Huawei component parts could continue to get approval to enter the U.S. market. Last year, we took an initial step to stop this by prohibiting devices containing Huawei modular transmitters, but now we go further to prohibit devices containing any Huawei-made logic-bearing hardware component, basically any smart component of the relevant covered entity. Second, we expand our oversight of e-commerce platforms. This follows the success of the FCC's Operation Clean Carts initiative, an agency effort working with e-commerce platforms to get rid from the internet millions of illegal listings of covered equipment. We clarify as well that providers that host third-party sellers generally still market equipment for purposes of the relevant FCC rules. We also require platforms to list FCC IDs when selling their devices, facilitating greater consumer awareness in FCC oversight and enforcement of our national security rules. But we also tailor the rules to minimize the regulatory burden, providing reasonable timelines, exempting small sellers and sellers of used goods, and similar actions to smooth the transition to these new requirements. Finally, the Commission also seeks comment today on a range of ideas to further modernize the covered list, proposing to expand FCC oversight over our existing equipment authorization process, given the crucial role it plays in national security. For all their great work on the item, I want to thank the whole team, including Chief Hendrickson, Alice Jew, Mateo Dunn, Catherine Patsis, Nevitt, Brendan Moss, Erica Hareen Moon, Thomas Rigalage, Chris Smink, Rebecca Clinton, Shannon Lipp, Kevin Pittman, and Deborah Broderson. Thanks all of you for your great work on this. And with that, we'll turn to comments to a vote, starting with my colleague, Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Are we near the end now? All right. With that, would my colleagues like to make any announcements? I have a couple of my own, but I'll defer one. One announcement of a sad note off the bat. It's with great sadness that I share that A.J. De Laurentiis, a beloved colleague and friend of so many here at the FCC, passed away unexpectedly on July 15th. After serving as in-house litigation counsel at MCI for 12 years, A.J. joined the FCC all the way back in 1999. He was in the Enforcement Bureau's Market Dispute Resolution Division for more than 25 years. And AJ was always there with a ready smile, and he will be sorely missed for sure across the agency. We'll have more news and updates on that hopefully here soon. On to the regular personnel announcements. In our office, our intern, Ellie Lichtenstein, is leaving. Ellie, thanks for standing up already. It's his last day with us as an intern in the office over the past several months. He's been a tremendous help on matters relating to space, to national security, to media. This fall, he'll continue his commitment to public service at NASA Goddard, where he'll intern in the Office of General Counsel, and we hope that he returns to the FCC someday soon. However, we're grateful for his time here, and we wish him all the best on his future endeavors. So thank you for your service here. This one is listed in my book as an optional announcement, but I'll give it anyways. Adam Candu. Adam, congratulations to you on your nomination by the President to serve as Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice. A big deal, a big upgrade for you. So I put out an entire statement yesterday. And I think in some cases, more is less for me, so congratulations to you as you go through that process. I mean, you have obviously been, very even-keeled, fair-minded, and brought your law professor background to this job, which we've benefited from a lot. Your deep dive into the law review articles, the scholarly literature, it's really been sort of helpful here across the agency. So thank you to you, and good luck in that confirmation process. Another note here, this one is tough as well. This is a very big, very bittersweet announcement. One of our great, highly respected bureau chief is announcing the end of their second tenure here at the FCC. Jay Schwartz, Jay already standing as well. This is a tough one. So Jay, when I got tapped by the president to be the chair, I waited all the way until December of 2024, so no time at all, and I thought, I need to have the right and perfect person to serve as the head of our Space Bureau, because I knew we wanted to do great and big things there. I got to know Jay, obviously, from his time working for Ajit Pai when he was chairman, and Jay was in the chair's office and did phenomenal work, and I knew that he was sharp, he would be even-keeled as well, and he'd be really aggressive about getting things done. And I got him to commit at least staying long enough to complete a big tentpole overhaul of the agency's regulations. I pushed hard to not have this item make it onto the July agenda. I tried to push into the fall, and Jay said no, that he was ready to get this big accomplishment across the finish line. But all the way back in December, for those of you that know Jay, he lives on a farm out in rural Virginia. I won't give you all the exact address to protect the anonymity of the cows that are out there. But I said I wanted to meet, and let's meet for coffee. I was really interested in him. I wasn't so interested that I was going to go all the way to his house in rural Virginia. So we met, about halfway on the outskirts of Tyson's Corner. And I remember it was a cold morning in December, and I made the pitch. I said, we really want you to join the team that we're building. I think, the Space Bureau and what we're going to do there is going to be really great stuff for the country's economic agenda. And I couldn't have thought of a better person to bring all different skill sets needed to make that happen, from a leader, understanding these issues, driving forward. And obviously Jay has just completely hit it out of the park. He took this monumental, historic task and he delivered right away. Jay dove into the weeds. He's made immediate progress since he got here. The first year alone, the licensing backlog, as we indicated earlier, was down 43%, and it's down another 15% on top of that in 2026 already. Jay's also importantly built a very great team across the Space Bureau that is aggressively carrying out the Build America agenda. In his time here, the Space Bureau started to unlock space spectrum abundance. He's eliminated outdated rules holding back the entire new generation of LEO broadband service. Most ambitiously, as we noted and as we adopted today, we have fundamentally changed and modernized the FCC's space licensing through what we think is a generational overhaul of that entire system. So I personally am very thankful that Jay agreed to sign up for a second run in government service for his work over the last 18 months. We, again, tried to sort of extend this tentpole accomplishment win a little bit longer, but Jay agreed to stay on at least till we get this done. And Jay has excelled in every possible way in this role, throwing himself into the deep and complexities of all the technical and the policy issues, successfully advancing the Commission's priorities through really high-stakes interagency coordination and processes. He's led the team with absolute class and professionalism. And yeah, he's even had the chance to drive me around the suburbs of Detroit through El Segundo on some of the car trips. But Jay is a true pro. We couldn't have done it without him. Jay leaves obviously big shoes and sometimes boots from the farm, boots to fill as well. But I'm confident that we will continue to deliver great results given what he has put in place here. Jay, we wish you all the best in your next endeavors. Thanks. That's going to be a tough one. Anything else from anybody? No? Okay. All right, Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next date for the Commission's monthly agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, August 6th, 2026.
Thanks. Until then, we stand adjourned.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to be starting the chairman's press conference momentarily. So if you could please take your conversations outside so we can get started. All right, thank you again. Welcome to the chairman's press conference, and I'll hand it over to the chairman.
Thanks. Good to see most of you again. Monty is the one exception to that rule. No, I'm just kidding. Monty, you're actually the one I do like to see. Look, we are 1 year on from announcing the FCC's Build America agenda, which we did last July in one of my favorite places, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We focused then on unleashing new infrastructure builds, strengthening competition, ensuring that Americans have access to affordable high-speed internet. 1 year later, we're already starting to see some really good results. Speeds are up, prices are down, and competition is intensifying. In fact, we just put out some data that shows that over the first 18 months of the Trump administration, prices for wireless services have dropped 4 times as much compared with the same time period during President Biden's administration. Last year, wireless download speeds increased by 51%. And again, competition is intensifying. We've had something like $130 billion of deal flow at the FCC that we've processed already. America's leadership in wireless is back after many, many years of not having spectrum auctions for a variety of reasons. The agency now is voting on the C-band, which is going to create a super band when you look at lower and upper now, 440 megahertz of spectrum, prime mid-band spectrum, which really sets this country up to be in a leadership position. The team here, as you heard me thank them already, did phenomenal work. We went on a matter of months from legislation to NPRM, now order. We're exceeding the statutory minimum of 100, doing 160 megahertz of spectrum. Very complicated issues, working with stakeholders, working with other government agencies, but the team absolutely nailed that one. So we just had a big auction recently that closed with over $3 billion. We're going to have this auction in 2027 of C-band. We're going to raise many, many billions of dollars for the Treasury as well. And we've got a number of auctions teed up for 2028 as well, including in the 2.7 gigahertz band. So for all the carriers, there's been a lack of spectrum for a long time. We now are expecting billions of dollars in bids from carriers. The good news is spectrum is a good investment. You can turn it around and put it to use, and as we've seen over the years, it's an appreciating asset as well. But that's the template we're on right now. We just did one, big one next summer, 2.7 in 28, and then also a number of additional auctions in 28 as well. So we're looking forward to the billions of dollars of investment coming from wireless providers and others that want to bid there. The space economy has obviously been a big focus for us at the FCC, and today's decision is sort of the keystone reform that we've been working towards. It was how I was able to keep Jay Schwartz on board here for 18 months, and he didn't escape any earlier, but the work that he and his team did to get that across the finish line has been phenomenal. So thanks, Jay, for that. Obviously, on the reindustrialization and the national security front, we covered a number of items there, both in this decision here, but this week. Number of enforcement actions, at least 2 on the NatSec front, plus proposing to move forward on a ban of these foreign-made military-grade drones, including the ones that are capable of swarming. Everybody loves seeing those light show drones that are out there, and that's great. But if they exist in a national security threat posture, that's not a very good thing, potentially. So we're seeking comment on that. Finally, we obviously are continuing our work on consumer protection. Robocalls, as I noted, we did an event with Secretary Bessent and with FTC Chairman Ferguson. We're all working hard to continue to crack down on this. Carriers are now blocking billions and billions of calls and texts. It's obviously not enough yet. We're not raising the mission accomplished flag, but the carriers are doing a lot. We're pushing hard through new regulatory frameworks. We're making some progress, but a lot more to do on that front as well. So with that, happy to pause and open it up for questions.
Okay. Josh Gossman, Capitol Forum. Chair, as I'm sure you know, there's settlement talks with Legato Networks and the government. How much would that help, if there's a settlement, in the upcoming C-band spectrum sales?
How much would it help from?
I'm sorry. If there was a settlement, you know, there's an argument that it might dampen sales if the government, specifically the Department of War, are able, or any government entity, were able, other than the FCC, were able to take spectrum without compensation. As you know, they sued the government for $39 billion. You approved, you and the whole commission unanimously approved the spectrum sale, and then the DOD allegedly didn't work with Legato. So the question is, you know, how much, if there is a settlement, and I believe they're deep in settlement talks, could happen any week, how much could that help assure buyers of the C-band that, you know, if we were to lose our spectrum in some manner, we would be compensated? How much might that help in the sales or potentially hurt if there is no settlement?
Well, I've not read in on the weeds on where things are with Legato. I think it'd be great if the long-running Legato issue is fully and finally brought to conclusion. Obviously, the FCC has some regulatory role with respect to licensees, and we can sort of look at different things. I think that's the right way generally to handle things, is having it run through the FCC. I don't think it impacts C-band at all. Obviously, I think Legato is its own issue set. And again, I'm not read in as to where it is. There's tremendous demand right now for spectrum. We're providing that. We've also done the legwork on the front end here, more so than I think a lot of other spectrum issues before. We've worked very, very well with the FAA, including some of them that were here today, Department of Transportation, Secretary Duffy, and we've got all the stakeholders here in a really good spot. And I think people can feel very confident about the spectrum rights they're purchasing in the C-band.
Wesley Brown with MLEX. It was announced recently that the next meeting will include an order to replace the national broadcast limit there. What made now the right time to do that? And I guess, do you have any worries or anticipate any challenges considering all the other challenges coming in on Nexstar Tegna?
Well, when we have items that are sort of ready and finalized and teed up, we tend to move pretty quickly. We don't sort of clear all the regulatory hurdles and interagency processes and then tend to sit on stuff. So when things are ready to go, we just sort of move them through. That's the issue here. The media ownership one is an interesting one. I mean, we've talked a lot, including from this podium, about some of the North Stars that we have in media policies, one of which is I think that the national programmers, there's Comcast, Disney, Fox, Paramount, in a lot of ways, I think a lot of them have amassed a tremendous amount of power over the last decade plus. And I think things are out of balance. And one of the reasons we're doing this is to help bring balance back to the broadcast airwaves. The broadcast system, as envisioned by Congress and for years the FCC, is different than a lot of other ways of distributing news and information. You want empowered local TV stations to identify the needs of the community and to serve those needs. And what's happened historically over the last couple years is the national programs have just become so dominant in that relationship with local TV stations. You've seen a lot less preempting of local programming. And if you end up in a world in which local broadcasters are merely undifferentiated pass-throughs of national programming, the entire idea of the broadcasting system breaks apart. You can get that through virtual cable companies. And so I think it's important that we have local TV stations that offer something different than just the national feed. And that's one of the ideas behind this action that we're taking is you allow local TV groups to scale, and therefore they can compete in a much more level playing field with the broadcasters, with the national programmers. Again, the idea with the cap originally was it was designed to constrain the power of the national programs. We didn't want them to combine significant scale in the programming side with significant scale in the TV side, and so you limited it. What's happened, though, is that the cap is no longer constraining the power of the national programmers, but instead holding back locals. And the reason for that, in part, is because the national programmers don't rely in the same way anymore on ownership of TV stations to get their power. Instead, they go directly to consumers in ways that is unconstrained by any percentage limitation. They have their own streaming services that can reach 100% of the population, their own apps that can reach 100% of the population. They negotiate directly with the national virtual cable companies like YouTube TV and reach 100%. So now the national programmers have clear paths to 100% of the regulated market, but the ones that are supposed to benefit from the 39% constraint are the ones still stuck with it. And so I think now is the right time to move forward so we can give local broadcast TV stations a fighting chance of scaling up and competing. And it has the knock-on benefit, I think, of bringing some additional balance back to the broadcast airwaves.
Yeah, Chairman, Monty Taylor, Com Daily. You were asked before the president's speech last week if carrying this speech is part of a broadcaster's public interest obligations, and you didn't say one way or another. Then during the speech, the president said ABC and NBC should lose their licenses for not carrying it. Does that mean carrying those speeches is part of a broadcaster's public interest obligation? And you've talked about the upper C-band auction and the 2.7, I think you said, coming.
728.
I'm no Howard Buzzkirk. But are there any specific bands you have in mind that would be next after that?
Yes.
Could you say what they are?
Well, there's a number that have teed up and that NTI is studying, and you can look at some of the studies that NTI is doing and is going to do to help fill out. We've said for a long time we want to get probably 3 spectrum auctions in 2028. Obviously, we have the big one right now with the C-band, that's 27. We've said we want to get up to 3, and 2.7 is one of those 3, and there's only a small number of other bands you could fill in to reach that. Look, when it comes to broadcast TV, again, I've always said it's different, and in the interview that you mentioned before Thursday, I was asked, and I said, I think that they should. I think that broadcasters should air. And look, I think there were some concerning reports that emerged. There was a report, I think it was one of the news media newsletters that's out there that said that one or more of the networks had been in communication with what the report said was Democrat aides about their decision not to carry the president's remarks. I think when you have the president of the United States standing inside the White House, delivering an important speech, I think that's something that broadcasters should be carrying. And so obviously this is an issue. There have been lots of concerns raised, including by members of Congress, about whether broadcasters and their decisions there comply with public interest. With respect to Disney, ABC in particular, we have an open proceeding right now on whether they've been operating the public interest, and I'm sure that there are going to be points raised in that proceeding that relate to Disney's decision there. And again, we're going to hold all broadcasters to the public interest obligations, and we're always looking to make sure that they're doing exactly that.
Chairman Ted Johnson from Deadline. Just to clarify that point, are you saying that it could be held against Disney for not airing the president's speech because, in your eyes, they're not fulfilling their public interest obligation?
Look, I think, again, broadcasters should be doing that. I think anytime a broadcaster is not operating in the public interest, that raises significant concerns. One thing I think that has to happen here, too, as well, is getting to some ground truth, because there's been, I think, reporting and misreporting about who carried it and when did they decide to carry it. For instance, you had a lot of, I think, local TV stations that are associated and affiliated with some of the national programmers that did run it. And so step one, I think, is making sure that we have the ground truth as to exactly what happened. But yeah, the FCC is going to hold people accountable to their public interest obligations. And I think there's more work for us on this issue ahead.
Although the networks, from their point of view, they say, hey, we have made this call before under President Biden, under President Obama, where we did not carry each and every one of their presidential addresses when the White House requested it.
Look, again, as a general matter, I think when the president speaks, from the White House on a significant matter, I think that's something that broadcasters should be allowing their viewers to get access to. So whether it happened before or not, I can't speak to that.
If I could sneak in one more question, and this is on the 39% cap. Senator Cruz issued a statement saying that he's skeptical a change can be made absent an act of Congress. Have you had any conversations with him since announcing this vote on the cap to, I guess, address his concerns that only an act of Congress can modify the cap?
Well, our teams are regularly and actively in conversation all the time about the different issues that we're working through at the FCC, and we've been pushed hard, including by a lot of members of Congress that say that the FCC, in their view, obviously does have the authority to do this. And historically, the FCC, on a bipartisan basis, Democrat and Republican leaders have been of the view that the 39% is not a hard statutory limit. In fact, when this issue was last before the D.C. Circuit, the court said that 39% was merely a starting point. There were statutory changes made subsequent to that, but as we walk through in our decisional document, those subsequent statutory changes in the view of the FCC did not eliminate the FCC's longstanding authority to modify the rule. But again, we're regularly in contact with Chairman Cruz and his team, and we've heard from lots of members of Congress on this.
Hey, do you have any concern over the end of the Chevron doctrine and how that might impact the FCC's position if there is a challenge?
I don't think so, not in this particular one. I think we feel comfortable about where we are as a matter of statutory interpretation. Again, we're writing against the backdrop of the D.C. Circuit looking at this language already, where the FCC took the opposite position. So in other words, in a world in which there was Chevron and the court was supposed to be deferring to the FCC said, we can't change the 39% cap in our view because we think it's set by statute. And the D.C. Circuit said, no, you're wrong about that. So even when that position had been deferred to, the court overruled it. So I think that's instructive as to how the court would address this in a post-Chevron world.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Chairman Carr, Ariel Hickson with MS Now. You just said that you're going to hold people accountable to their public interest obligations. When we think about what the president said with threatening to revoke those broadcast licenses for ABC and NBC after they didn't take that live address, what does that mean when you're saying holding people accountable, holding other broadcast networks accountable? Should they be looking over their shoulders moving forward, especially after the FCC already initiated those early license reviews for 8 ABC-run stations moving forward? I'm just trying to get a blueprint of how this operates.
Well, I think broadcasters obviously should be cognizant of their public interest obligations. I think for the most part, the actual operators of TV stations understand it. I think it's sort of different for folks that are in the media ecosystem generally that are used to cable or podcast or streaming or newspapers, that this concept of the public interest obligation, there's things you have to do as a broadcaster that are different than what you might have to do running a cable channel. And so I think it's right and appropriate and good for broadcasters to be aware of the public interest standard and what they have to do. We put out a pretty lengthy public notice a couple months ago that went through all of the different, some of the different public interest obligations that broadcasters have. And yeah, broadcasters should be aware of that, and broadcasters should know that they should be accountable. To the extent that they felt like the FCC was going to look the other way and they could act just like a cable channel or a newspaper, I think we've been pretty clear that that's not going to happen with this FCC. We do have some licenses that are before us, and we're going to be taking a look at all of these issues.
On another note, the UK has started this process of banning social media for children under 16. It's been a trend that we've been seeing that's happening overseas. Does the FCC have any future plans to potentially limit social media access in schools nationwide?
Well, two things there. One, obviously, the focus really of what we do is the broadcast ecosystem, and for reasons that we say it's distinct. There's licenses, you are given something for free by the government, you're given a monopoly, meaning you can exclude others. Social media is an entirely different dynamic from that perspective. None of those reasons for that regulatory framework exists there, at least from the FCC's perspective. So I would defer in the main perhaps to Federal Trade Commission or others. When it comes to screens as a general matter, probably to back up a little bit from social media, we are concerned about screen time for kids in the context of education. That's why we started a proceeding a month or two ago looking at the E-rate program and making sure that our approach to E-rate, which subsidizes screen time for kids in schools, reflects the results in the current thinking about that, and it reflects where a lot of state and federal policymakers are as well. So there may be a role for us, well, there is a role for us there in the E-rate side in terms of the broader debate about social media. I don't think it would be the FCC. I think it would be more FTC. So good. Thanks all. Great to see you. We will see you short turn here to the next month, so you don't have to wait much longer to get back at the table. Good to see you guys.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll next head off to our Bureau press conference, and my colleague Will Wyquist will kick us off.
Hi, folks. So we're going to do the Bureau press conference. Sorry, excuse me. If folks could take their conversations outside the room or quiet down some, please. All right, folks. So we're going to take questions on the items adopted today during the meeting. So we're going to go through. Excuse me. Pardon me. Can you guys please keep it down or take it outside the room, please? Thank you. So we're going to go through the meetings in the items in the order which they were considered at the meeting. So first up, the C-band item from the Wireless Bureau. Monty, Joel, and all. Thanks.
Hello.
Yeah, I was hoping you could tell me if there's been any changes to the item from the draft version.
Yeah, there are various adjustments made in response to stakeholder ex partes along the way, and commissioner edits, but just sort of the usual process.
You can't tell me anything specifically about what kind of edits we're talking about?
No sort of major bottom line cuts from what went out in the public draft. There were, some, the public draft that went out was a redacted version, so the one that will come out, the final released one, will include some of the specific numbers on the incentives and things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Next question, Space Bureau, Space Modernization. Jay? You gonna miss this?
Hi, I'm Monty Taylor, Daily. I have the usual question about whether there were any changes, but then I also was hoping you could tell me specifically whether there were any changes to Earth Station coordination requirements, because there's a lot of lobbying about that. And also, who's going to run the Space Bureau now?
Okay. So we had a lot of active comments on the item. All the commissioners contributed edits, and so there were a number of changes to the item. I would say they all tended to be around the edges. So the basic direction of the item is very close to what was publicly released. But with such a big item, you're going to have a lot of things which, through comments and stuff, we catch and made changes to. So I won't go into specifics at this time. You'll obviously see the item in not too long. And I don't know. If you hear anything, let me know. So.
Any other questions on this item?
Just a quick question. Congrats on it.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Have you looked at the permit for AST Space Mobile and their goal to create a space? They've had the license in or the application in for a while.
We're just taking questions on the item adopted today, unless
Okay.
Jay sees any connection. But,
We have lots of license requests before us, and we look at all of them.
Okay.
Any other questions on the item? Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, Consumer Governmental Affairs Bureau on the broadband labels. Any questions? Ed?
think you know where I'm going with this.
I think so.
Do you have any changes from the final draft, or to the final draft?
Let me start by saying I also don't know who's going to run the Space Bureau. So
Fair
just
enough.
in case that was your follow-up.
If anyone wants to answer that, they're welcome to.
A couple things that were mentioned from the dais during the proceeding earlier today. So the item has been adjusted to add a CPAC report. So that's our Consumer Protection Accessibility Advisory Committee. So they'll do a report on the effectiveness of labels that will be submitted to the commission. And then there were some additional minor tweaks to the requirements related to pass-through fees. So it now includes a requirement that if providers do choose to do a pass-through fee, it would separately have an additional breakout of pass-through fees that are related to government pass-through fees, and then third-party pass-through fees that the provider chooses to include as part of that rolled up to amount total on the label. Again, they would still have the option to itemize pass-through fees if they prefer that. Beyond that, it was just a few minor clarifications in other places throughout the item.
Any other questions on this item?
Hey, Monty, I assume.
Hello. Yes. You know what I'm going to ask.
Yep. Commissioner Trustee had a number of edits for this item. Let's see, in particular about the investigation disclosure requirement and whether parties would have to disclose confidential investigations. That's been clarified, as well as some questions about technical measures used to identify non-compliant and fraudulent filings, including AI-related guidance and how that might be used. Additionally, a clarification about whether attorneys submitting filings for RMD entities could be subject to commission enforcement action for any fraudulent filings. There are a few others, not at the request of Commissioner Trustee, in response to ex parte filings. We revised the national security and law enforcement basis for removal to include foreign adversary controlled companies as well, and seeking comment on further technical approaches to analyze RMD filings more efficiently. Yep.
Any other questions on this? Sorry, couldn't hear me because the mic was off. I didn't realize. Turn it off. Sorry about that.
Press the button. Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there had been any changes from the draft to the final.
Looking for another question first, but we'll get right into that one. Just a couple changes. Obviously, we had a lot of stakeholder feedback. We looked at adding exceptions for smaller sellers, used devices, and existing listings. Some delays to new component prohibition until 30 days after hits Federal Register for publication. Grandfathering in pending certifications and SDoc applications. We clarified what does not qualify as logic-bearing components. Created 2 marketplaces, compliance tiers based on marketplace involvement. And we extended compliance deadlines to 6 months, marketplace fulfilled, and 9 months for third-party listings. And we also updated the cost-benefit analysis as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else on this item? Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right, with that, I will hand it off to Commissioner Gomez. Thank you all.
Hello. All right. Good afternoon. I want to start with one of the most consequential things happening at this commission right now. Next month, the FCC plans to vote to ignore Congress and the federal law and unlawfully eliminate the national broadcast ownership cap. Congress set the cap at 39% in 2004, and it did so deliberately. It is not a commission rule, it's a statute, and only Congress has the authority to change it. A vote to eliminate this cap next month would be unlawful on its face and certain to face court challenge. You don't have to just take my word for it. There is bipartisan concern for this action. The Republican chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, Senator Ted Cruz, has said he is skeptical this change can be made without an act of Congress. It's also bad policy, and we don't need to speculate about why. We are watching it play out in real time. When this commission waived the cap to push through the unlawful Nexstar-Tegna merger, a federal judge stepped in and issued a preliminary injunction, finding that the states and DirecTV are likely to succeed in proving the deal violates antitrust law. That is a court telling this commission in plain terms that this kind of consolidation harms competition and harms consumers. Now, some pushing to eliminate the cap like to point to newspapers as proof that scale is what the industry needs to survive. But newspapers are not a model to follow. They are a warning. Between 2004 and 2020, the largest newspaper chains grew their share of the industry from under a third to 70%. Over that same stretch, the country lost more than 3,300 newspapers and roughly 1,600 independent owners. Consolidation did not save that industry. It picked apart what was left of it while the industry itself collapsed. Handing broadcast televisions the same playbook will not protect local news, it will finish the job. Let's be honest, the real goal here is to reward the broadcasters willing to fall in line with this administration. We saw it last week when the president threatened to pull the licenses of stations that declined to air his political speech, while stations that dutifully complied were praised for it. As I said at the time, the whole thing was ridiculous. The FCC has no authority to punish broadcasters for exercising their First Amendment right to choose what is newsworthy. They made those same editorial decisions under presidents of both parties without any complaints. And in this case, the remarks were freely available online to anyone who wanted to watch them. Now we're seeing the same instinct to reward allies in the Paramount-Warner Brothers Discovery merger, which remains in legal limbo after a judge temporarily paused it this week over serious antitrust concerns. That transaction carries a concerning indirect foreign ownership stake nearing 50%, with the door left open to as much as 100%. I've called on this commission not to rubber stamp that review. Instead, we must take up that foreign ownership question in the open with a full vote of the commission rather than a backroom staff level decision. I am reiterating that call today. Taken together, this commission has enabled media giants racing to consolidate what is left of our broadcast media landscape, while consumers pay for it with fewer choices, higher prices, and fewer voices. That is what is at stake next month, and why we must continue to pay close attention. And now I'm happy to take your questions.
The chairman just said that he referred to reports that some of the networks had consulted with Democratic Party aides in making the decision about whether to carry the president's speech or not, and he said that was concerning. Is that concerning? Does that give the FCC some sort of line into punishing these networks?
First of all, I don't know anything about that, but I always have to be grounded in the fact that it is not for the FCC to tell broadcasters how to make their editorial decisions and what content to place in their networks or in their local broadcast stations. They have a First Amendment right to make those decisions, and in fact, it's censorship one way or another if we tell them they can't broadcast something, and it's forced speech if we tell them they have to do so. So there is nothing here that violates any rule or statutory provision with regard to these networks. I continue to say that this vague public interest standard is being used just to punish speech that this administration doesn't like and to reward speech that it does like, and that's inappropriate, and it's contrary to the law and to the Constitution. You're like, can you guys hear me? Because this thing is higher than my head.
Just fine. Yeah.
I know,
Commissioner Ted Johnson from
because Andy was the last speaker, that's why. Okay, I'm sorry, Ted.
No worry, no worry. Going to the media ownership cap, what did you think of the chairman's statement that what his goal is to empower local broadcasters, especially when they face off in negotiations with the networks, I guess, in terms of he seems to present this as a kind of a balance of power issue between these local stations, even the local stations groups, and the networks and their O&Os.
Whatever policy choices this commission wants to make, it can't ignore that Congress wrote into law that we have a 39% cap. We cannot waive it. It specifically said we can't forbear from enforcing it, and it removed it from consideration in the quadrennial review. So it, in multiple places, basically said, don't touch this cap. So my point is, if Congress makes a determination that there is, in fact, some policy reason to allow ownership above the cap, that is for Congress to act and to change the law.
One other question that has to do with the ABC situation and the early station renewal. What do you expect the majority on this commission to do?
Well, I mean, maybe I should rephrase it to what would I like them to do. I worry that what's going to happen is they're going to cherry pick, as I mentioned last month, they're going to cherry pick among the commenters in order to punish ABC. Whether it's with regard to the View, whether it's regard to this early license review, this commission needs to understand the limits of its authority and not use it in order to influence how broadcasters broadcast, what they broadcast, who they broadcast over the airwaves, and the content of their news.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gomez, Ariel Hickson with MS Now. As you're aware, the president has threatened to revoke those broadcast licenses for ABC and NBC. My question is, at what point is there a limit to what the president can, I guess, how the FCC responds to what the president threatens, especially as Chairman Carr says that that the FCC is going to hold people accountable to their public interest obligations. I guess, yeah, what's the process moving forward for everyone?
I've talked about the fact that these threats are empty threats because the broadcasters have the Constitution on their side. They have the Constitution, the law, and the public on their side. And that's why I'm so glad that Disney has made it very clear that it is going to defend its rights. And I think the ultimate conclusion, if this commission takes action against them, as this administration has threatened, it's clear they're going to go to court. And when they do, they will win. And that'll be the rebuke that this commission needs to get it to respect its duty to the Constitution and to the statute.
Commissioner Gomez, back on the cap there. What do you view would be a good alternative? I guess obviously there are the worries that the media landscape isn't necessarily equal. I guess is there anything that's maybe arose from this as something that's caught your eye for something that could do both, not consolidate fully and but also answer some of those calls?
Yeah. It's clear that the media landscape has changed. The economics have changed. We have many more players, which is another reason, by the way, why we are so focused on just local broadcast stations, is interesting given the dynamics of the market itself. And so I have said, I don't like just wholesale deregulation. I don't think that serves the local communities very well. But I do think that we need to look at it from a market by market basis, because of the fact that we need to understand the changes in the economics, and we want to make sure that we have voices representing those communities. So that has been my proposal, but we still got to respect what Congress told us.
Commissioner, what do you think of the way that it's framed for August 6th? It's removing the cap if it's in the public interest. So what do you think the chair is trying to say about if any of the networks, Fox tries to add stations, they're right at the 39% cap as well. Why do you think it was phrased that way? And then maybe also, why do you think, in the practical nature, Nexstar Tegna clearly violates the 39%, and the commission, not you, but the commission approved it. Right, the Bureau approved it. Good catch, right, the Media Bureau approved it. Thank you for the correction.
You're welcome.
So, in a practical nature, what would be changing, since already the Bureau has approved going over the 39% for Nexstar and Sinclair, which they, would like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good catch that the way that this is being done is not a wholesale lifting of the cap, but rather a case-by-case review, sort of on a transaction basis. And what concerns me about it, besides the fact that I think it's unlawful, is that it does open the door to treatment of different broadcasters differently depending on who their owners are.
Just as a quick follow-up, since Pandora's box is, if it passes on August 6th, Pandora's box opens up, do you think it could stay this way, or just the cap would be lifted? Even if it's written this way, do you think, once, again, if the vote goes 2-1, do you think that realistically, if this survived in the courts, just the cap would be lifted, despite what the chair would like?
That's a lot of if this happens, if this happens, and if this happens. So if it survives judicial review, then it certainly, I guess, enables the commission, no matter who is in power, to take the approach. But I'd be surprised if it passes. I'd be extremely surprised if it passed judicial review. Monty?
You have expressed concerns about the tribal window in the C-band auction. Did the order that they did today, did that address any of that for you?
I did get some edits to that section. I mean, obviously, we're not doing a tribal window, but I was able to get some specific language changed that seemed to, trying to see what I have on this, seemed to say that to preclude any tribal windows in future actions. I did get that removed, and some additional language to sort of soften some of the rhetoric that was unnecessary in the item about tribal windows.
Commissioner, another question. Have you had any indication that the White House is going to put forth one or more nominees on the commission?
I have not heard anything.
No word, no indication,
No.
Near future?
I have not talked to the White House about this.
Okay.
Don't put in there that I laughed. Monty, you're just so full of it today.
I'm
Don't
a
tell me
mouthpiece.
Paul Kirby has a question.
There's various people are asking me to ask these. There's a bunch of orbital data center satellite constellations pending before the commission, and a bunch of environmental groups are saying the FCC should take the environmental impact of these into consideration, which the agency usually doesn't do with satellite stuff. Do you have an opinion about what the FCC should do with that?
I've been trying to get myself educated on the consequences, legally, regulatory, of having these large constellations. So I'm really just now delving into it. Okay, am I excused? Thank you.